You're putting in Biden's face somebody else's talk as Biden is speaking on TV. They won't accept those ads anymore. So that's the guardrail. You have to be careful. Again, doctors, you can get help before surgery because a lot of options are available to you, but you, the doctor, will press the button or cut the skin, not the machine.
Some good point. So if I can read that back to you, essentially AI should be supporting us but not duplicating us in the decisions that we're making. I guess if we can then take that, you've referenced a couple of, Professor, a couple of sectors there. What kind of sectors do you think this AI is most likely to be applied to in terms of adaptation? What's the kind of data and sectors that we'll use?
I think it has tremendous uses in addressing climate change. One is definitely for predictability of the weather patterns and climate systems around the world and early warning systems. And then also predicting what that might do to lives and livelihoods of people, especially those who are living close to the sea level within 1 meter, because we will unfortunately reach those levels in the next 10, 20 years. So artificial intelligence through geospatial technology can be extremely powerful to provide that information for governments, policymakers to take those decisions well in advance and not wait until disasters and climate crisis hits certain regions. So that is definitely, in my view, one of the most important areas. But there are many others. I mentioned agriculture before. Agriculture certainly, and another one which I feel but it still needs the kind of regulation and the boundaries, as was just mentioned, is in education. Because teaching kids of today for future, you invariably have to incorporate artificial intelligence and knowledge of what that means and how it can be leveraged and used, utilized, and applied has to be included in the curriculums.
Thank you. On a practical basis then, within EMICAL, do you use AI technology at the moment within your business operations and models, or is there any plans in the future to consider that?
We do have already an application for an AI. We're also working on other applications as well. What I want to clarify, I'm going to start with the use case that we are able to, we have patented recently. So in district cooling, you produce, you distribute, and then you provide to the end user. So part of our underground network pipes, which has the chilled water, was facing several leakages, right? And this is again, it's a wastage of resource, water, chilled water, and energy, which is chilled. So based on a technology we have used, we were able to find out to the very good accuracy using AI, the location of where the leakage has happened. So it was through several endeavors of data collection, trying new technologies and innovation, we were able to basically decrease the accuracy to few meters of finding out the leakages. Moreover, what we are working on is basically optimizing our operation. So the aim is to reach an unmanned plant operation, right? We're also through AI, we're influencing the behavior of consumption for users. We're also working with regulatory bodies in order to, let's say, enhance the design of buildings in terms of energy consumption related to cooling.
Interesting. A couple of other examples listening to the previous speaker. One is just simple traffic control, traffic management in mega cities, and that's happening in many cities that I'm aware of, including in India. But Singapore is a good example of it, to ensure that the traffic flows in a most efficient way, not creating, not adding to the greenhouse gas emissions and carbon pollution in the cities, and thereby preventing health hazards. That's definitely one. And then the other one is actually China, one of the major grid operators there. They apply AI to ensure that the flow of electricity in the grid is managed based on demand rather than the convergence of the wiring around the system. So that is also that has saved them something like 20% in terms of how energy is produced and distributed in the grids.
Can I add to that? Yes. You know, adaptation is a relative term. If we adapt too much, you spend money that was not needed. Like, how far do you raise, like Dubai? And talk to the Dubai University president day before yesterday. They built a model showing what Dubai will look like 50 years from now. Mostly flooded, 50 years from now. Unthinkable. But they say, okay, build dikes around it. How high do you make it? AI gives you flexibility in planning. What if? What if this goes 2 meters, what happens? 4 meters, what happens? You can build the models. So you have flexibility in your decision-making process. That way, you get more credibility from the policymakers. You have thought through the consequences and safety features. If you just talk about build a 10-meter high, guaranteed, you don't need that. We don't need that. So, and what resource you need to build a 10-meter high wall around Dubai? It's a resource issue. This is an engineer, that's my focus. That I am doing things which is useful, but also we can financially support it to do that. So this is the issue, is adaptation through AI gives you more flexibility to design.
So we're talking AI providing flexibility on scenarios in terms of some of the adaptation measures of options to address. But we've also alluded a little bit in terms of problem identification. So that's more within the mitigation realm. Other panelists, if you could probably expand a little bit more, where do you think then AI, I know this is about adaptation, but let's prevention is better than cure, right? So where could we really fast track AI to help us with probably some of the mitigation of climate change and help us to try and identify some of the sources of the problem? Any thoughts on that?
Nothing comes immediately to mind, but listening to others, one thing that I thought of is, had AI been used by companies, and this is in the corporate world, this is not about adaptation, but more in corporate world, would Kodak, Nokia, Blackberries, would they have survived if they had the advantage of predictability of what the customer behavior would change in the next several years? So that kind of thought process can be applied in many different ways, including in adaptation, mitigation, means of implementation, in the areas of climate change solutions. So definitely, I think so. I'm also a great fan of something referred to as resilience frontiers, that you think what the world would be in the next 10, 20, even 50 years from now, and project what life would be at that time and then work backwards. And that's where, again, the power of AI can come into extremely very useful application to plan, to model, and to build your products, build your adaptation capacities.
So I believe since we started collecting data along many journeys that is relevant to adaptation. So we started living in buildings, and then those buildings evolved. How did they evolve? Because along the way, a new journey emerged. I need to do this in the building, I need to do this in the building. And again, it's all catering around the human being himself. So data started being collected. And what did data help us? Data helped us in modeling the new transition to a new, let's say, a feature or a functionality, right? And again, this is coming from the concept of traditional cooling versus district cooling. Humans started moving into communities, and cooling communities required adaptation, both from the decisions we were making and again as an impact on the climate, because the traditional cooling uses very bad refrigerant versus, let's say, district cooling. It has high impact on the CO2 emission, et cetera, et cetera. So all those forms are driven by journeys, what the human being are evolving to in their needs, and moreover, with the data that is becoming more and more and more available. We cannot forget the impact of technology and the evolution of technology in what we have reached today. So, I mean, I graduated in 1999 as an electrical engineer, and it was very difficult to talk to a sensor. Whereas now, every equipment, you can talk to it, you can command it. So this evolution is resulting with a humongous amount of data, which again, we are tapping into its potential. And again, trying to find out how we can evolve with this data, how we can automate, how we can facilitate.
Thank you for that. I think I wrote my PhD starting in paper, so I think, yeah, it shows you how quick we're moving in this space. Professor?
Good point. Mitigation or adaptation. I want both. Example, if you mitigate, gives you time to adapt. Why you adapt? Because you are facing flooding in an adaptation. But if you slow down the water level rise, you don't need to build a dam that high. So I work with mitigation first, then slow down the problem growth, and then deal with it. And as you said, technology will evolve. The new technology is 20 years. We don't even know what will happen 25 years from now about flood control. We don't know that. So this is the issue. So mitigation is a path to give me time to adapt using new technologies.
We mentioned customers, public, etc. in terms of AI. There's clearly a lot of concern and nervousness within the wider populations. Do you think we'll be able to bring the public along with us on this journey of AI in mitigation? Do you think that will help to tell the story for them to realize the level of seriousness of the problem?
Yeah, that's a difficult question, because my fear is what AI will do is to, I really hope not, it would add to the developmental divide that exists in the world. I mean, right now, the number of people around of the 7 billion population who have access to internet technology and all of that is still not as wide as it should be. And the AI would actually, my hope is that it would actually close that gap and spread the benefits of technology to a wider population than to create that, than to add to that gap. So that is my concern. I do not have answers to that, but I think that to acknowledge it, to address it, and to build policies that would be more, as I said, humane and inclusive would be extremely critical.
I believe same as everything. I mean, from pandemics to technology to advancements, medical, etc. Humans will have a first impression, then a reaction, then they will develop methods to deal with it, and then adoption will happen, or resistance as well. So it's a human thing. I think it's irrelevant of what we're facing. However, it is very important to always utilize the potential of new emerging, I would say, innovation.
Professor, do you want to start?
Directly to what you asked about public awareness and public trust. I'm optimistic. I gave a talk in a school in Virginia before coming here, 7th grade kids, 12-year-old. Talk was STEM education. Why should you do science, technology, engineering, math, education to do well in life? After I finished talking, one kid asked me, how about AI? 12 years old.
Yes, yes.
That gives me some hope that when he or she grows up, they'll be part of their life.
Yes.
It's like a language for them. So I'm very optimistic that would be the lingo of people who will be 25 years old 15 years from now. So, but point is, give them hope and not the wrong kind of AI. That's the issue. IEEE, one second, has a standard now, AI education for children, standards on that. Yes, so we are working on that. Thank you.
I'm very conscious of where we're at with time, and we need to start rolling into, I guess, some closing remarks. But one thing I want to really try and draw from you is, if you wanted for the audience to take away today one key point, one key thought around this debate in terms of AI and adaptation, what would be the key takeaway message for each of you? If you can each respond to that, please.
I will repeat what I said. Use AI as an assistant, not as a teacher. Let it not decide for you what you should do. Ask AI to do what is good for you. Then you decide yourself.
And to add to that, it has to be humane and inclusive to apply to the widest communities, societies, and populations around the world.
Well, I would say experiment, learn, evolve.
Excellent. Some really insightful views from the panelists there, and I'd like to thank you all for your attendance today and look forward to engaging with you in the future. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Another picture. Yeah, okay. He's here for engineer. How do you double E? I'm also, I registered.
again.
Do it again. Sorry. Catch up on it. Is there any kind of really key pertinent question that you want to ask? You've already shared your stuff with? Friendly discussion? Anything that's
Yeah, pretty open as well.
everything that's there?
There was a lot of questions, but let's see how it goes.
Keep it a very open discussion around kind of financing to enable this transition to out. Hello? Hello? Testing. It's a very empty room. It varies from different days. I think that's why they're streaming it on YouTube so that it kind of pushes it. Yeah, so it is being streamed, yes. It's on the YouTube link of WGEO. If you go onto them, you'll be able to watch it on there. Hello? Testing? Testing, can you hear me all right? Yeah? Okay. Just test. Hello, testing 1, 2, 3. That's all good. Testing, indeed. There we go, we've got it. All right, here we go. Let's start. We all good? Start. Okay, good afternoon everybody, and thank you for joining us this afternoon to talk about climate finance for adaptation. And we're really going to go through today, hopefully a really useful discussion on climate finance mechanisms. So WGEO very kindly invited us all to have this discussion. And firstly, before we start, if you could please just introduce yourselves. I have a really interesting panel today. So starting with yourself, Dr. Sri.
Thank you very much for having me. My name is Sharif Al-Khouli. I'm partner and head of Middle East and Africa infrastructure at Actus.
Thank you. And me.
Morning, I'm the Chief Investment Officer of Hy24, which is the dedicated fund manager for hydrogen projects with a worldwide scope.
Thank you very much for this invitation. Myself, I'm Raphaël Lebel. I'm head of the Sustainable Finance Observatory, which is a tool to track the alignment of financial flows on the Paris Agreement in France. And I'm hosted at the Institut de la Finance Durable, which is a coordination of financial actors in France working on these topics.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And really excited to start this conversation today with you. Clearly the financing the transition is a key topic item at the discussion here at COP this year. Can I just ask you, each of you really, what type and value of capital funds do we think we need to get us to net zero? Over to yourselves.
The big figure to keep in mind is that we need $4 trillion of investments dedicated to net zero assets per year by 2030 to be on the pace to reach net zero targets. So 4 trillion is roughly 5 times as much as is currently deployed in that space. So it's a huge investment allocation that is required. And actually, half of it should go into the emerging markets economy. So this means that it's a huge challenge as well in terms of getting above the comfort zone in terms of investing into the more risky challenge areas.
You want to add on that, Raphael?
Maybe to tell more about the money. So 4 trillions. 4 trillions a year, that's an amount. According to the United Nations, to finance the 17 SDGs in 15 years, they said we should mobilize 7 trillions a year. So it was a plan of 105 trillions in 15 years. And what we see now, after 8 years, that what we've done on 8 years is what we should have done in the first year. So we are very late. And if we look more in details, 90% of that goes to mitigation, on only 10% on adaptation, which is the topic today. So definitely that's the numbers. And another numbers I want to put in comparison as well, it's 100 trillion a year, which is the GDP today. So what we are talking about is between 4 to 7% of the yearly GDP to finance the transition. So that's not that much when we think like that. So why is not working? I think it's not working because we don't have the good indicators, the good mechanism to really finance the transition. And that's the key. And to answer the question, what's the challenge to finance transition, to reach the net zero? We need to do 3 things. Of course, we need to finance the good transition, the good green activities, and we can think about green energies, of course. But the only way to stay under 2 degrees, the only way to reach net zero is to stop emitting CO2, and that the most effective factors of emitting greenhouse gases is burning fossil fuel. So that's what we really have to do, and very fast. And between both, we need to finance the transition. So we need to finance all the companies, including the oil and gas companies, which need to transition. They are not green today, but they can be considered in transition. So the ones who are in transition, we need to finance them. And we need to identify them with good transition plan. That, I think, the 3 main things.
Dr. Sharif, we're in an emergency. By any other sector, any other industry, an emergency means immediate, now we need to do something about it. We're talking about relatively small figures when we're talking the money there. What do you think some of the biggest challenges? Why can't we go at the pace needed?
So the reality of the matter is emerging markets are bearing the brunt of the impact of climate change. And for energy transition to happen, it has to be a just transition. And a cornerstone of that just transition is the accelerated flow of capital into these emerging markets where it is badly needed. The reality of the matter is that so far, only 20% of that capital has gone into emerging markets ex-China, although this is where 85% of the population is. So I think if we are looking now, I was speaking at an IEA session yesterday, the amount of capital that has to flow into these countries between now and 2030 is 3x what has been put into them so far. For this to happen, there will have to be a step change in the way that these opportunities are tackled and addressed. There has to be a concerted effort by governments, by regulators, by multilaterals, DFIs, but also by the private sector to bring in and to mobilize the capital that's needed for climate mitigation, for climate adaptation, and for resilience. And I think that, time is running out. As I said, these countries are home to 85% of the world's population. And every day that there's a delay in the mobilization of this capital, there's a very big impact that's happening. Just look at the cost that happens on the back of every climate crisis that happens in any one of these countries, and it's just far too big.
Thank you for that. I mean, Amir, we're saying step changes needs to happen, and as you rightly point out, we're spending the money in terms of addressing the impacts that's occurring from this. Why is this so hard? What's needed to make those step changes happen?
Well, if you look at where the biggest pools of capital are today in the world, like insurance companies, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, they tend to have very conservative investment mandates to deploy large amounts of capital. I was today with the person in charge of the Geneva Association that gathers most of the insurance companies in the world. They have an aggregate asset base of 23 trillion. But they don't put much money at work into the energy transition assets because they represent such a high risk asset class. And actually, she told me that the way for her to circumvent this risk was to invest into funds, because some funds which have ability to manage those risks with a dedicated fund manager, structures, people, and mandates can get over the line. But even then, if you look at the fund universe, investing into renewable energy now with a PPA and a market for power is something that is rather easy to do now. It's become really mainstream and the cost of capital has gone massively down. But if you're investing into a space like hydrogen, or in some cases into battery storage or some other new areas of the energy transition, which are the ones which are going to be massively transforming the game with innovation, those plays are more challenging, and the traditional infrastructure funds will have more trouble to invest there. And that's the reason actually why at Ardian we decided to create a specific mandate for hydrogen, because we felt that if we were going with a usual route, we would not be able to raise the fund and deploy the fund. And we gathered a team of people who are coming from both the asset management side and the industrial side. So the combination of both leads us to create High24. And High24 then raised money from not only institutional investors, but also from industrial investors. And so this hybrid approach, this kind of blended approach between industrials and institutional investors, between experts and asset managers, I think is a very strong way to get over the line in terms of deploying money in a more creative way, in a more aggressive way, in terms of taking more risk, but then having also an expectation that the reward down the line will be there.
Amir, if I can ask you, do you expect many more funds like Arden to be set up to help overcome some of these challenges that sit here at the moment?
So I was very happy to read in the press that a climate fund of 30 billion had been announced 2 days ago, managed by a few US fund managers for climate. So that is a very good initiative. The money is going to be earmarked specifically into geographies which are like India, Africa, and Latin America. So places where the change is need to happen at a big scale. So we welcome these kind of initiatives. We welcome the fact that there will be broader climate labels attributed to the fund universe space, so that there are even more fund managers that think about allocating more of their strategies towards climate versus the traditional asset classes, because then it makes them easier to raise funds from the institutional investors, which tend to be, again, pretty conservative. So if there is a kind of incentive brought to them because there's a climate label that is kind of stamped by the governments, then I think it's a way to drive a climate action through investment in a faster way.
Thank you for that. And Dr. Sherif, do you think there's any specific issues to the global south emerging countries in the funds?
Yes, I think, as I alluded earlier, a lot of these countries are at the very sharp end of the impact of the climate change. And I was very happy to see finally the activation of the Loss and Damage Fund being confirmed on the first day of COP28. I think that's a great achievement. It was launched in the dying minutes of COP27 and finally activated on the first day of this COP. But to be very honest, the financial commitments put into it so far are a start, but they're nowhere near sufficient. I think to be able to really make a dent on the impact of climate change in the countries of the global south, I think we need to be looking not at commitments of hundreds of millions, but I think we should be looking at the first 50 billion. I think this is how we can really start to make an impact and to start to have a real ability to make a change on these countries that are being heavily impacted. They need a lot of access to technology transfer. They need a lot of access to the rollout of renewable energy. But for the rollout of that renewable energy to happen, the private sector has to play a much bigger role. In some of these markets, it is harder than more developed countries to frame the opportunity because of the perception of risk. And this is where I think there needs to be a lot more creativity when it comes to considering the financing instruments that will be necessary to mobilize this capital.
Amir, building on that, what do you see the role of IFD in adaptation finance?
I think that we need to have proper KPIs, and typically these institutions can play a key role in helping us to define KPIs that drive change and drive more finance additionality into adding up to the public sector's investments into the space. So I think there is a need for having a stronger cooperation between the private and the public into overcoming the challenges. And it goes beyond just replicating the traditional public-private schemes that we had before. I think we need to reinvent those schemes and probably have appropriate KPIs to achieve this.
That's a good point. You want to add to that?
Yeah, I agree with the KPIs, and I think what we really need to do is that, you know, we said 95% of the global GDP, we talked about the 5%, but if every time you spend 5% event for attenuation adaptation, you do 95% of the GDP in business as usual, meaning business which is not aligned with a sustainable way of life. It's just like you give to a guy who wants a house $20. It's not just a good scale, you know, and it's like every time you give him $20 to buy a house, in the same time you make your own factory destroying his land. So we really need to do is the KPIs for every project, and we need to check every project with all the indicators in a do not significant harm approach. For too long, I see a report which says, I do this project because it's good for the SDG 1, which is less poverty in the world, or the SDG 11 for infrastructure and sustainable city. Okay, that's good. We need to do it, but we need to do it checking that we are not harming the 15 or 17 others. By this way, we will transition all the money, and we'll not talk about just one or two projects, but we'll talk about all projects happening in the country. How can we make the step that the developing in this developing country don't go for a bad developing, but just like a sustainable developing directly.
Thank you for that. Amir, what role then do you see the damage funds in increasing frontline community resilience? So what role of the role and loss of damage funds in increasing the frontline community's resilience?
I think they can play a key role, but I think my colleague here will be more qualified to mention this. But in particular, in the case of, for instance, setting up some biodiversity initiatives, I think this can be a clear value driver.
Dr. Schaaf, would you like to add to that?
I think the Loss and Damage Fund has a very important role to play. It is there for a reason. It is there to provide capital mobilization into the countries that are heavily affected from the impacts of climate change. I think that now that it's established, now that we started to have capital commitments into it, it needs to be scaled up. I think that the key next step is to really get the financial commitments predominantly from the G7. We need to see a lot more commitment from the G7 to provide commitment to that fund. But I think this will provide a very, very good UN overseen instrument or pool of capital to really provide the necessary funding that goes into projects that will really start to move the needle on this impact of climate change in the developing world.
Okay. So staying with yourself for a minute then, Dr. Schaaf, what do you think the co-benefits and countries' participation in voluntary carbon markets have on enhanced climate resilience and adaptation finance?
So I think there's, first and foremost, there's a moral obligation on the most polluting countries which are the G7, to provide a financial commitment into the loss and damage fund, because the reality of the matter is that the loss and the damage have already happened. It's happened because there's been far too much emissions coming out of these countries. 90% of the emissions are coming from countries that are not part of the emerging markets, whereas the brunt of the climate change is happening in these emerging markets. So the damage has already happened, the loss has already happened. It's now time to really provide a compensation mechanism to be able to alleviate the impact that's already happened. So that's the first point. The second point is, I think that to be able to provide an opportunity to frame the investment into the areas of the world that have, as I said, 85% of the population and the youngest populations, it's such an important growth engine for the global economy. So a lot of the developed countries are having aging populations. They look for the global south and to the emerging markets to be an exporter of talent. They look for that, they rely on it for a lot of the global supply chains. So I think to have vibrant and viable economies in these countries is very much essential for the overall well-being of the global economy and for the well-being of the economies of the biggest emitters.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask a bit of a random question now, I guess. So less technical, less focused, but to a layman's person, the world is watching COP. The world is saying, we're at COP28, we're going to get to COP 288. What's actually really going to happen and change here? We know this needs key finance in terms of moving around. How do we explain in layman's terms to the general public what needs to be done, and do we think they'll accept the message we're putting out from COP?
Well, the reality of the matter is we are running down a clock. And if we cannot keep the 1.5 degree target alive and get as close as possible to it, the reality of the matter is that life on this planet is going to change beyond recognition in ways that are so dramatic, in ways that are devastating, that affect the layman and the non-layman. It affects everyone on the face of this planet. So this is not in any way a niche topic. It's actually very much centered stage for the well-being of every single person on this planet. So there's a reason why every year we convene and we have these discussions, and from one year to the next there's progress, because in my mind there's no other topic that is of more significant importance to the well-being of this planet than to mitigate and resolve the problems of climate change.
Thank you. Amir, there's progress each year. We know the clock's running down. We know it needs to be quicker. Is it fast enough, and how do you get it faster?
It's not fast at all. If you look at the figures, just about what is our theme here, which is investments into climate, the figure back at the COP21 in 2015 has the amounts of investments to the green economy has increased only by 30% since 2015. So that is good to some extent, but it's extremely slow in comparison with what needs to be done, i.e. multiply by 4 or 5 times the pace of annual investments going into that field. Going back to the figures we mentioned at the beginning. So I very much agree with Raphael that if we continue to go in the pace of just considering we need to do an energy transition, a slow energy transition, I think ultimately we will disappoint everyone, because people will not believe anymore that a net zero target is achievable, and everyone will just say, well, why do I care? Why do I have to make efforts if down the road it's never going to be achieved? So people have to feel that there are actions that are really going to change, not things at the margin, but things structurally in order to make step changes into the energy change. And so for me, it's no longer, the word we should use is no longer energy transition, it should be energy transformation.
Raphael, and over to you. We talk about this as if this is a choice. To me, we don't really seem to have a choice, right?
Oh yeah, it's not a choice. It's coming anyway. The choice we have is, do we want to prepare and change when we have time and energy, good energy, easy to access, and still a geopolitical situation which is not so bad, and I have a thought for people who are in a country in war, but still for 30 years, the world has never been that much of peace in all history. For 30 years, we doubled the GDP. But for 30 years, we didn't help to reduce the poverty in the world. So even with all this stability and this wealth, we didn't manage to be more fair and to share more. So when I say that, it's a failure. So what can we do? I think one good thing is like to try to change the rule. I like the Bridgestone initiative because they say, you know, why the country in developing country will have higher interest than the emerging country? Well, because they are more risky. Yes, but that's not fair. They need it more than us. And that made me think about monetary creation. We talked about the rate, but I even said they should have free money to do this kind of investment for the transition. And when we were on COVID, what did we do? We did monetization, monetaire, sorry. We tried money just to help us to pass the COVID war, the COVID crisis. We did the same thing in 2008 in the financial market. We start to buy bonds on the market to do stabilization. So what I mean is finance is not physics. We cannot change the temperature of boiling water, but we can change the rate of debt, and we can change the rules that's financing the world. And I think that's what we need to do if we want to pass this huge crisis which is coming.
I think you probably hit on some really home truths there, and I think in some ways that's quite sad and disappointing, right? We're basically saying this isn't about money, this is about priorities. And when we look at it like that, you know, can we look our grandchildren in the face and say, this wasn't prioritized? It doesn't kind of feel like this isn't possible. We referenced COVID there, that things can be done, things can be changed, right? We are getting very close towards the end of the time, and I think we're just about to open up into probably some really good key discussions there. But with that in mind, though, what would be the key takeaway that you'd want to this message? The session's being recorded, to be distributed. What would be the key message that you'd want people to take away in terms of climate finance and the mechanisms required?
Well, I think I just don't mind, actually, but yeah, changing the rules of finance, I think that's the main key. Another key for my dual children, I'm not daddy yet, but I think we need to have a positive scenario and a positive story. For years, we said it's going to be hard, it's difficult, we need to make effort. But actually, for half of the world, it can be a good progress of living. So for them, I think it's pretty easy. And for the other part, well, maybe working 60 hours a week behind the computer is not the best life we can have. And maybe we can think about another kind of living which are more connected to the earth, etc. More time with your child, less time in the underground. So I think we need to have new stories, and we need to help to find these stories. And the connections with finance may be that every time we make a project, we think, although not only on the product, on the incomes, but we put some money as well to help change the mind, help change the consumption. And we need to change the consumption. We need to give new ideas of standard of living and consumption to global change, I think.
Thank you. And Amir, to you, some of the key takeaway message that you'd like to leave for today.
Well, I think this COP is called the COP of action. So if we want climate action, it won't happen without investing into climate action, which means that actually you need a coherent way of cooperation between, on one side, the public entities, the regulators, the industrials, and the investment sector.
And Sharif, final comments from yourself.
Energy transition is crucial for keeping 1.5 degrees alive. For energy transition to happen, we have to ensure that that transition is just. And as a core component of that just transition, we have to ensure the flow of capital into the countries that are deeply impacted by climate change at a completely different pace than what has happened before. The launch and the funding of the Loss and Damage Fund is a very good step, but I think alongside that, we need to see a much bigger role for the private sector to come in and to make the necessary investments that are needed. But for that to happen, there needs to be a lot more efforts going into de-risking the investment opportunity that is available for the taking, for the capital to flow in.
Thank you very much. I mean, when I look at this and I hear these conversations, you know, the words here in here is fair, just transition, action, speed. It kind of feels we really need to go at pace of this. We've got the opportunity. We want it to be about action. And yeah, really welcome your views and thoughts today, some really experienced individuals, and look forward to your contributions in the wider conference. I'd like to thank each of you very much for your contributions today, and I wish you a really successful COP. Thank you very much. Thank you.